I'm Elena Ramirez. I'm 32, and Forbes just ranked me as the youngest female billionaire in tech. But last Thanksgiving, my mother introduced me to the neighbors as still trying to figure things out, while my cousin got a 10-minute speech about his promotion to assistant manager at a car dealership. My net worth? $2.4 billion. My mother's opinion of me? Elena's always been a dreamer, never realistic about anything. Ever had your own family treat your billion-dollar empire like a hobby while celebrating someone else's minimum wage raise? Stay with me. This story gets wild. Growing up in Millbrook, Arizona, success had a very specific definition in the Ramirez household. You went to college for something practical: accounting, nursing, teaching. You got married before 30, you bought a house with a white picket fence, and had kids who called grandma every Sunday. Deviation wasn't rebellion, it was failure. My mother, Carmen Ramirez, worked double shifts as a hospital administrator for 23 years. She was the kind of woman who ironed her scrubs and never missed a parent-teacher conference. Practical, dependable, unshakable in her belief that the world had rules and following them was the only path to security. "Elena," she'd say, watching me tinker with our ancient desktop computer at age 12, "stop breaking things and go practice piano. Nice girls play piano." But I wasn't breaking it. I was making it faster. I'd figured out how to overclock the processor and optimize the memory allocation. Our dinosaur gateway was suddenly running games it had no business handling. "Mom, look! I made it run 3 times faster." She glanced over, sighing. "That's nice, mija, but what happens when you break it permanently? Then what? We can't afford to replace it." She never saw innovation, only risk. By 14, I was building websites for local businesses: Hernandez Auto Repair, the Sunrise Diner, Martinez Family Dentistry. $50 here, $100 there. I'd stay up until 3 a.m. teaching myself JavaScript and CSS, my room lit only by the blue glow of my monitor. My report card that semester was straight A's, plus a note from my computer science teacher, Mrs. Patterson. "Elena has exceptional aptitude. She should consider advanced programming courses." My mother's response was, "Computer classes are fine as an elective, but don't let this distract from real subjects. You need to focus on pre-med or business administration, something stable." She threw the note away. I watched her do it. That night, something crystallized in my mind. She wasn't trying to hurt me, she was trying to protect me from what she saw as inevitable disappointment. In her world, people like us didn't become tech innovators. We became the people who kept the systems running, not the ones who built them. But I was already building. By junior year, I had 12 local clients and was making more money than my part-time job at the mall would have paid me. I was designing e-commerce platforms, inventory management systems, custom databases. My bedroom looked like mission control: 3 monitors, cables everywhere, sticky notes with code snippets covering every surface. "Elena, this is getting out of hand," my mother said, standing in my doorway one evening. "Your room looks like a tornado hit it, and you're staying up too late. Your grades are going to suffer." I turned in my chair, exhausted but excited. "Mom, Henderson's Hardware wants to pay me $1,500 to build their entire online ordering system. $1,500! That's more than you make in a week." Her face tightened. "And what happens when they realize you're just a teenager playing around? What happens when it doesn't work right and they want their money back? What happens when you can't deliver what you promised?" "But I can deliver it. I've already built the prototype." "Elena," her voice was patient, like she was explaining to a child why they couldn't have ice cream for dinner. "This isn't real work. Real work is something you can depend on, something with benefits and security. This is just playing around on computers." She walked away before I could respond. The Henderson project launched flawlessly. Their online sales increased 340% in the first quarter. I got a handwritten thank you note from Mr. Henderson himself. "Elena, you've revolutionized our business. We couldn't be more grateful." I showed my mother the note, along with the check for $1,500. She smiled tightly. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Now put that money in your college fund and focus on your SAT prep. You'll need good scores for pre-med." I stared at her. "Mom, I don't want to be a doctor." Elena, we've talked about this. Medicine is stable. Doctors always have work. This computer thing is nice for extra money, but it's not a career. But what if it could be? She laughed. Not mean, but dismissive. Mija, be realistic. How many people from Millbrook, Arizona become what do you even call it? Entrepreneurs? That's for people from Silicon Valley, people with connections and money. We're practical people. We work hard, we save money, we build something solid. That conversation happened on a Tuesday. By Friday, I'd started researching Stanford University's computer science program. Not because she'd approve, she wouldn't, but because for the first time I realized her limitations weren't mine. But here's what I didn't understand yet. The hardest part wouldn't be proving I could succeed. It would be proving it to the one person whose opinions still mattered most, the woman who raised me to be practical, dependable, and realistic. The woman who would watch me build a billion-dollar empire and still ask when I was going to get a real job. The irony hit me like a freight train every time I came home. There I'd be, stepping out of my Tesla Model S in the driveway of my childhood home, the same cracked concrete where I used to skateboard, now worth less than what I spend on coffee in a month. My phone would buzz with notifications, Bloomberg wanting a quote, TechCrunch requesting an interview, my assistant reminding me about the board meeting with Fortune 500 executives the next morning. But the moment I walked through that faded blue front door, I became Elena who still hasn't figured her life out. It wasn't malicious. That's what made it so surreal. My mother genuinely believed I was wasting my potential. While Forbes photographers were setting up shots of me in my corner office overlooking downtown Seattle, my mother was saving job listings from the Millbrook Gazette. Administrative assistant position, full benefits package, was taped to the refrigerator during my last visit, right next to my nephew's crayon drawing of a dinosaur. I just worry about you, Mija, she'd say, typically while stirring rice in the same pot she'd used since I was 12. All this computer stuff, it's so unpredictable. What if it all just stops working one day? What then? I tried explaining that this computer stuff was a software company that processed payments for 63 million users worldwide, that we had offices in 14 countries, that I employed 8,400 people, that major banks licensed our security protocols. Her response? That sounds complicated, and complicated things break. Meanwhile, my cousin Danny, sweet guy, but his biggest achievement was memorizing McDonald's menu, got treated like he'd just cured cancer every time he got a shift promotion. Danny's doing so well at the restaurant, she'd announce to anyone who'd listen. He's training new employees now. Very responsible position. Good benefits, too. Elena should take notes. Danny made $11 an hour. I made more than that every second of every day, even while sleeping. But here's the thing that really twisted the knife. She wasn't wrong to worry about stability. She'd watched my father's construction business crumble during the 2008 recession. She'd seen neighbors lose homes, seen families fall apart when the sure things vanished overnight. Her skepticism came from survival, from watching too many dreams become disasters. She just couldn't comprehend that some dreams become empires. The disconnect reached its peak last Christmas. I'd flown home on my private jet, not to show off, but because it was the only way to fit the trip into my schedule between investor meetings in New York and product launches in Tokyo. I took an Uber from the regional airport because landing at Millbrook Municipal would have been too flashy, too look at me. I walked in wearing a simple sweater and jeans, carrying gifts I'd carefully chosen, not too expensive, nothing that would feel like showing off, just thoughtful presents that said I'd been listening to their conversations all year. The family was gathered in the living room. My Aunt Rosa, Uncle Miguel, cousins Danny and Patricia, my mother's neighbor Mrs. Henderson, no relation to my former client, and a few family friends. Normal holiday crowd, everyone catching up on the year's events. Elena, my mother called from the kitchen, come tell everyone what you've been up to. I walked in, hugged everyone hello, settled onto the couch next to Patricia. Someone asked about my work. I run a financial technology company. We help businesses process payments securely. Nods around the room, polite interest. Then
my mother emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of tamales. And everything shifted. "Elena's still doing her computer thing," she announced to the room with that tone, the one that said she was being supportive, but clearly didn't understand what I was talking about. "She works very hard, but you know how those tech jobs are. Here today, gone tomorrow. Very unstable industry." Uncle Miguel nodded sagely. "My nephew worked for one of those .com companies, laid off after 6 months." "Exactly," my mother said, setting down the tray. "That's why I keep telling Elena she should think about something more solid. Patricia just got promoted to head nurse at the hospital. Danny's assistant manager now at the restaurant. Real careers, with pensions." I sat there listening to my mother explain to a room full of relatives why my billion-dollar company wasn't a real career while they discussed Danny's promotion to assistant manager like he'd just been elected president. The worst part? I couldn't even be angry. She was doing what mothers do, worrying, protecting, trying to steer me toward what she believed was safety. She just had no idea that I'd already built the safest foundation possible. 3 days later, Forbes published their annual billionaires list. My phone exploded with congratulations messages. The Wall Street Journal wanted a quote. CNN requested an interview. My mother called that afternoon. "Elena, Mrs. Henderson saw something online about you. Something about being rich? She's confused. I told her it must be a mistake, or maybe they meant your company made $1 million total, not that you personally. I mean, that's not possible, right?" I stared out the window of my Seattle penthouse, watching ferries cross Iliot Bay, and realized the moment had finally arrived. The moment when 2 decades of "Elena needs to be realistic" was about to collide with Forbes billionaire under 35. "Mom," I said quietly, "we need to talk." The seeds of my mother's doubt weren't planted in cruelty. They were planted in terror.
I was 8 years old when I first understood that dreams could be dangerous things. My father, Roberto Ramirez, had been the dreamer in our family. He ran Ramirez Construction, specializing in custom homes for Millbrook's growing population. For 3 years running, he'd been the most successful contractor in the county. Our house was his showpiece: hand-laid tile, custom cabinets, a kitchen island he'd carved himself from a single piece of mesquite wood. He'd wake up every morning at 5 a.m., kiss my mother goodbye, and head out to job sites with blueprints tucked under his arm and sawdust already coating his boots. He'd come home every evening, dirt under his fingernails, talking excitedly about the houses he was building, the families he was helping settle into their dreams. "Mija," he'd tell me while showing me his sketches, "never be afraid to build something bigger than what already exists. The world needs people who can see what's not there yet." My mother would smile from the kitchen, proud of his ambition, proud of the life they were building together. Then 2008 happened. I remember the exact moment everything changed. November 15th, 2008. I was doing homework at the kitchen table when my father walked through the front door at 2:17 in the afternoon, hours before he should have been home. His face was gray, his hands shaking as he set his keys on the counter. "Carmen," he said quietly, "we need to talk." The housing market had collapsed overnight. Every single one of his projects, 7 custom homes in various stages of construction, had been canceled. The buyers couldn't get financing, the investors pulled out, the suppliers wanted their money immediately, and the bank was calling in his construction loans. 6 months of legal battles followed. I watched my father shrink a little more each day. The man who used to sketch house plans on napkins during dinner sat motionless for hours, staring at bills he couldn't pay. The kitchen island he'd carved by hand got repossessed, along with most of our furniture. We moved into a cramped apartment on the other side of town, everything we owned fitting into the back of a borrowed pickup truck. "I should have been more careful," he kept saying. "I should have seen it coming. I should have been realistic." My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Hospital administrator during the day, bookkeeper for a law firm in the evenings, weekend shifts at a grocery store.
I'd see her leaving at dawn and returning after midnight, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. The worst part wasn't the financial struggle. It was watching my father disappear. The man who used to tell me to build bigger than what already existed began warning me against taking any risks at all. "Elena, promise me something," he said one evening when I was 10. "Never put your family's security in the hands of a dream. Dreams are beautiful, but they don't pay rent." 3 months later, he was gone. Not dead. Worse in some ways. Just absent. He'd wake up, go to his new job as a maintenance worker at the county courthouse, come home, eat dinner in silence, and go to bed. The spark that had made my hero had been extinguished completely. My mother never said it directly, but I knew she blamed his ambition for our family's destruction, his willingness to dream big, to take risks, to believe in possibilities rather than focusing on certainties. That's what had cost us everything. "Your father was a good man," she told me years later when I asked why he'd changed so much. "But when you have a family, being responsible matters more than being ambitious. He learned that lesson too late." That's when the rules crystallized in our house. Safe choices were good choices. Stable income was more valuable than unlimited potential. Taking risks was selfish when other people depended on you. Dreams were luxuries that practical people couldn't afford. By the time I was 12 and showing aptitude with computers, those rules were gospel in the Ramirez household. My mother had spent 4 years rebuilding our lives from nothing, and she wasn't about to watch her daughter repeat her father's mistakes. "Elena, you're smart," she'd say when I showed her a new program I'd written or a website I'd designed. "But being smart isn't enough. You need to be practical. You need something you can depend on." Every conversation about my future became a lesson in risk management. When I mentioned wanting to study computer science in college, she'd respond with statistics about tech layoffs. When I talked about starting a business someday, she'd remind me of my father's construction company. "Do you remember what happened to us? Do you remember eating cereal for dinner because that's all we could afford? Do you remember moving 3 times in 2 years because we kept getting evicted?" That's what happens when people chase dreams instead of security. The irony was that she was trying to protect me from exactly the kind of catastrophic failure that had destroyed our family. She'd seen firsthand how quickly success could vanish, how completely dreams could collapse, and how devastating it could be when ambitious plans met harsh reality. What she couldn't see, what she couldn't allow herself to believe, was that the same intelligence that made me good with computers also made me capable of building something sustainable, something that wouldn't collapse the first time the economy shifted. But by then, the damage was done. In her mind, ambition equaled instability. Innovation equaled irresponsibility. Success that came too easily had to be temporary. Your father thought he was building something permanent too, and look how that ended.
So every achievement became evidence of impending failure. Every success became a reason to worry about the inevitable crash. Every step forward became a reminder of how far there was to fall. She wasn't trying to crush my dreams. She was trying to save me from the heartbreak she'd watched destroy my father. The problem was, her definition of safety had become my definition of prison. And I was about to break out in the biggest way possible. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the moment that changed everything. The moment when 20 years of Elena needs to be realistic collided with a Forbes photographer standing in our living room. It was a Tuesday in March when everything shifted. I was in my Seattle office, 3 floors of glass and steel overlooking Puget Sound, when my assistant Jen knocked on my door with an expression I'd never seen before, somewhere between excitement and disbelief. "Elena," she said, holding her tablet like it contained nuclear launch codes, "Forbes just called. They want to do a cover story about you being the youngest female billionaire in tech." I blinked. Cover story? Full spread, photography session, the works. They want to fly a team to Millbrook to photograph you in your hometown, interview your family, get the humble beginnings angle. She paused, studying my face. You look like you've seen a ghost. I had, in a way. The ghost of every conversation with my mother about getting a real job. The ghost of every family gathering where my success was dismissed as playing around on computers. The ghost of my father's broken dreams and my mother's determination to protect me from the same fate. They want to interview my family? That's the plan. They're particularly interested in your mother's perspective. You know, the immigrant family, working class background, daughter who built an empire against all odds. It's exactly the kind of story they love. My stomach dropped to somewhere around the building's foundation. Jen, my mother doesn't know. Doesn't know what? Any of it. The valuation, the Forbes ranking. She thinks I run a small tech company that might fold at any moment. She's been saving job listings for me. Jen stared at me like I just announced I was secretly an alien. Elena, your net worth is $2.4 billion. How does she not know? It was a fair question. How do you explain to someone that you've been hiding your success from the person who raised you? How do you say that you've been downplaying the biggest achievement of your life because you're terrified of the conversation that follows? She's protective, I said finally. She's seen what happens when big dreams collapse. She genuinely believes she's saving me from disappointment. By not knowing you're a billionaire? By not knowing I'm taking the kinds of risks that create billionaires. The Forbes team wanted to fly down in 10 days. 10 days to figure out how to tell my mother that the daughter, the one she had been worrying about for years, the one she kept encouraging to find a stable work, had just been named one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world. I called her that evening. Mija! Her voice was warm, tired from a long day at the hospital. How are you? Are you eating enough? You sounded stressed last time we talked. Mom, I need to tell you something. Some people are coming to visit next week. Journalists. Journalists? Why? Are you in trouble? No, Mom, it's good news. Very good news. But it's going to be a lot to process. Elena, you're scaring me. What kind of journalists? What did you do? How do you bridge a gap that wide in a single conversation? How do you explain that the daughter she's been worrying about has actually been building an empire while she wasn't looking? Forbes magazine wants to do a story about my company, about how it's grown. They want to interview you. Forbes? Isn't that the magazine about rich people? Yes. Another pause, longer this time. Elena, why would they want to interview me? What aren't you telling me? And there it was, the moment of truth hovering just out of reach. The moment when everything would change between us. Mom, remember how you've always worried about my work being unstable? About the company not being real enough, not being secure enough? Yes, and I still worry. These tech companies, they come and go so fast. The company is worth $12 billion. Silence. Complete, absolute silence that stretched across the phone line like a chasm. Elena, her voice was very quiet. 12 million? Billion, with a B. The sound she made wasn't quite a gasp, wasn't quite a sob. It was the sound of a worldview cracking apart. That's not possible. You said it was a small company. You said you helped businesses with payments. You never said, how can it be worth $12 billion? Because we help 63 million businesses with payments. Because we process $400 billion in transactions every year. Because what I built isn't small, Mom. It never was small. But you live in that apartment. I live in a penthouse that costs more per month than most people make in a year. I just never told you that part. Another silence. This one filled with everything she thought she knew about my life, reshuffling itself.
Elena, her voice was barely a whisper. Are you rich? The question that had been hanging between us for years, finally asked directly. Yes, Mom, very rich. How rich? I took a breath. Forbes is ranking me as the youngest female billionaire in tech. My personal net worth is $2.4 billion. The silence that followed was different. Not confused silence or shocked silence. It was the silence of a woman whose entire understanding of her daughter's life had just been revealed as fiction. "You're a billionaire," she said finally, testing the words like they might burn her tongue. "Yes. My Elena. My daughter who I've been saving job listings for. My daughter who I thought was struggling with her little computer company. Yes." "Oh my God." Then quieter. "Oh my God, Elena. What have I done?" That's when I knew. In that moment, I heard 20 years of worry transform into 20 years of misunderstanding. 20 years of trying to protect me from failure when I'd been succeeding beyond her wildest imagination. "Mom, you didn't do anything wrong. You were trying to protect me." From what? From becoming the most successful person in our family's history? From achieving something I couldn't even dream of? From ending up like your father. The words hung between us, finally spoken aloud. "But you didn't end up like your father," she whispered. "You became something I don't even understand." Next week, Forbes would arrive with cameras and questions. They'd want to photograph the bedroom where I'd taught myself to code, interview the mother who'd raised a billionaire, capture the story of the girl from Millbrook who'd built an empire. But first, I had to convince my mother that her daughter's impossible dream had somehow become an even more impossible reality. The conversation that followed would change everything between us. Everything. To understand how we got to that impossible phone conversation, you need to understand Millbrook, Arizona, a town where ambition was measured in steady paychecks and dreams were considered luxuries for people who didn't have bills to pay. Population 23,847. One main street lined with family businesses that had been passed down through generations. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where your reputation was built over decades, and where success was defined by showing up, working hard, and not making waves. The Ramirez family had lived there for 3 generations. My great-grandfather had worked the copper mines until they closed. My grandfather had run a small auto repair shop until Walmart arrived and changed everything. My grandmother cleaned houses for the wealthy families who lived in the hills overlooking town. The doctors, the lawyers, the people who commuted to Phoenix for work that paid more than anyone in Millbrook could imagine. This was the world that shaped my mother's understanding of how life worked. There were the people who cleaned the houses and the people who owned them. The people who fixed the cars and the people who bought new ones every few years. The people who worked for wages and the people who paid them. What there wasn't, in my mother's experience, was a path from one side to the other. "Elena, mija, you need to understand something," she told me when I was 15, after I'd spent 3 weeks building a database system for Dr. Morrison's dental practice. "There are worker bees and there are queen bees. We're worker bees. We work hard, we're reliable, we take care of our families, but we don't pretend to be something we're not." Dr. Morrison had paid me $800 for that database, more than my mother made in a week at the hospital. But instead of seeing it as evidence of my potential, she saw it as confirmation of how precarious my position was. What happens when Dr. Morrison realizes he can hire a real programmer from Phoenix for the same price? What happens when he decides this teenage girl doesn't know what she's doing? Then you're back to nothing, except now you've gotten used to easy money. Easy money. That's what she called it when I earned more in a weekend than most adults in Millbrook made in a month. Because in her world, money that came from intelligence, rather than physical labor, couldn't be trusted. Money that came from solving problems, rather than following orders, was temporary by definition. The social hierarchy in Millbrook was rigid but clear. At the bottom were the service workers, restaurant staff, store clerks, janitors. One step up were the trades, mechanics, construction workers, electricians. Higher still were the professionals who worked for other people, nurses, teachers, middle managers at the few corporations that had satellite offices in town. At the top were the business owners and professionals, the handful of doctors, lawyers, and entrepreneurs who employed others rather than being employed. But even they were small scale. The richest person in Millbrook was probably Dr. Patterson, who owned 3 medical practices and lived in a house that would have been considered modest in any major city. This was the ceiling of possibility in my mother's mind. Dr. Patterson represented the absolute pinnacle of success, a respected professional who employed a dozen people and could afford to send his kids to private college. When I talked about technology companies, about global markets, about scaling software solutions, I might as well have been talking about space travel. These things existed in a different universe from the one she inhabited.
Elena, you watch too much TV, she'd say when I tried to explain how software could be distributed worldwide, how a single program could serve millions of users simultaneously. That's Hollywood nonsense. Real businesses serve real people in real places. Her reference points were the businesses she knew. Martinez Family Restaurant, where success meant being busy enough to hire your cousins as waitresses. Henderson Hardware, where growth meant opening a second location in the next town over. Successful people in Millbrook were the ones who built something solid and local, something that served their community and provided steady employment for their neighbors. The idea that someone could create value for millions of people simultaneously, that a single person could build something worth billions of dollars, that technology could scale infinitely without geographic limitations, these concepts had no equivalent in her experience. But it wasn't just the scale that seemed impossible to her. It was the speed. In Millbrook, success took decades to build. Dr. Patterson had worked for 25 years to build his practice. Maria Santos had spent 15 years growing her catering business from a home kitchen to a commercial operation. Success was earned through persistence, reliability, and gradual growth. The idea that someone could go from zero to billions in less than a decade violated everything she understood about how value was created in the world. In her experience, anything that grew that fast had to be unstable, unsustainable, probably fraudulent. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, was one of her favorite sayings. And by her standards, everything about the technology industry sounded too good to be true. Companies that existed only as software, valuations based on potential rather than physical assets, entrepreneurs who became wealthy without ever making anything you could touch or hold. To someone who had spent her entire life in a world where value came from tangible goods and services, the entire concept of the tech economy seemed like an elaborate con game. Show me a company that doesn't make anything real, and I'll show you a company that will disappear the moment people wake up, she'd say whenever news stories mentioned tech startups or IPOs. This worldview wasn't ignorance, it was experience. She'd lived through economic cycles that wiped out businesses built on speculation and hype. She'd watched neighbors lose everything when the copper mines closed, when the auto plants moved overseas, when the housing bubble burst. Her skepticism was earned through decades of watching solid, reliable things prove fragile when circumstances changed. What she couldn't see was that technology had changed the fundamental rules of how businesses could operate, that software could scale without the limitations that constrained physical businesses, that global markets could be accessed from anywhere with an internet connection, that a single person with the right skills and timing could create something that served millions of customers worldwide. From her perspective, I wasn't building a technology company. I was gambling with my future, chasing fantasies that would inevitably collapse and leave me with nothing but regret and wasted time. She'd seen dreams destroy my father. She'd rebuilt our family from the wreckage of his ambitions. She was determined not to watch his daughter make the same mistakes. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't making his mistakes. I was making entirely new ones, at a scale she couldn't even imagine. The moment I chose myself over my mother's approval came on a sweltering August afternoon in 2009, 3 days before my 18th birthday. I was sitting in the guidance counselor's office at Millbrook High, staring at 2 acceptance letters that represented 2 completely different futures. Stanford University's computer science program on the left, Arizona State University's business administration program on the right. Mrs. Chen, the counselor, leaned back in her chair, studying my face. "Elena, you realize what you're looking at here, don't you? Stanford is offering you a full ride plus a research stipend. Kids from families with millions of dollars don't get opportunities like this." I knew. I'd been carrying the Stanford letter in my backpack for 3 weeks, reading it until the paper started to soften at the creases. "Elena Ramirez, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for the Morrison Institute Technology Scholarship, a full 4-year academic scholarship including tuition, room, board, and a $5,000 annual research stipend." But I also knew what was waiting for me at home. 2 days earlier, I'd shown my mother the Arizona State acceptance letter. The safer choice, the local option, the path that would keep me close to home and focused on practical business skills rather than risky technology specialization. "Mija, this is perfect," she'd said, genuinely thrilled. "You can live at home, save money on housing, and I can make sure you're eating properly. Business administration, that's exactly what you need. Something stable, something that makes sense." I hadn't shown her the Stanford letter yet. "Elena," Mrs. Chen continued, "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've never seen a scholarship package like this. Stanford is basically paying you to attend one of the best computer science programs in the world. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." "I know," I whispered. "But my mom thinks I should stay local. She thinks tech is too unstable." Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment. She'd known my family since I was 14, had watched me navigate the aftermath of my father's business collapse, understood the dynamics that were pulling me in different directions. "Elena, can I ask you something? What do you think?" No one had asked me that question directly. For months, every conversation about college had been about what was practical, what was safe, what made sense for our family's financial situation. No one had asked what I actually wanted. "I think," I said slowly, "that if I don't take this chance, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what could have happened."
And if you do take it, I might fail, and my mom will be right about everything. Or I might succeed beyond anything anyone in Millbrook has ever imagined. That evening, I sat at our kitchen table with both letters spread in front of me, waiting for my mother to come home from her late shift at the hospital. I'd made my decision, but I knew the conversation ahead would be the hardest of my life. She walked through the door at 11:47 p.m., exhausted, still wearing her scrubs. "Elena, why are you still awake? Don't you have work tomorrow?" I'd been working part-time at the library, shelving books and helping people with computer problems. Steady work, local work, the kind of job my mother understood and approved of. "Mom, sit down. I need to talk to you." She looked at the letters on the table and something in her expression shifted. "Elena, what is this?" "I got into Stanford." She picked up the letter, reading slowly. I watched her face change as she processed the details. The full scholarship, the research stipend, the acceptance into one of the most competitive programs in the world. "Stanford," she said quietly. "In California." "Yes." "And they're paying you to go there?" "Full ride plus $5,000 a year for research." She set the letter down carefully, like it might explode. "Elena, this is incredible. But California? That's so far away. And computer science? We talked about this. Tech jobs are unpredictable. Mom, this is Stanford. This isn't some fly-by-night operation. This is one of the best universities in the world. I know what Stanford is. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I also know what happened to your father when he chased something big and risky. I know what happens to families when people get ideas above their station. Above our station? The words hit like a slap. Mom, they chose me. Out of thousands of applicants, they chose me. This isn't getting ideas above my station. This is earning my way to a higher station. Elena, listen to me. She reached across the table, took my hands in hers. I've spent 10 years rebuilding this family from nothing. 10 years making sure we never go through what we went through with your father's business. I can't watch you throw away everything we've built for something that might not work out. You're not throwing anything away. I'm building something new. With what foundation? With what safety net? Elena, you're asking me to support you pursuing the exact same kind of dream that destroyed our family the first time. That's when I understood. This wasn't about Stanford versus Arizona State. This wasn't about computer science versus business administration. This was about whether I was willing to break my mother's heart to chase my own future. Mom, I said quietly, what if I'm right? What if this works? What if I succeed? And what if you don't? What if you end up like your father, broken, disappointed, regretting that you ever tried? I looked at her across the table, this woman who had sacrificed everything to keep our family together, who had worked 3 jobs to rebuild what my father's dreams had destroyed, who genuinely believed she was protecting me from making the same mistakes. Then I'll come home, and I'll start over. But Mom, I have to try. If I don't take this chance, I'll never forgive myself. And if you do take it, and it ruins your life, will you forgive me for letting you go? The question hung between us like a chasm. The next morning, I filled out the Stanford acceptance forms. I arranged for student housing. I signed up for orientation week. I bought a bus ticket to California because even with the scholarship, we couldn't afford airfare. My mother didn't speak to me for 3 days. On the morning I left for Stanford, she drove me to the Greyhound station in silence. When we pulled up to the curb, she finally looked at me. I hope you're right, mija. I hope you prove me wrong about everything. I grabbed my 2 suitcases from the back seat. Everything I owned fit into 2 pieces of luggage and a backpack. Mom, I love you, and I'm going to make you proud.
She noted, tears in her eyes. You already make me proud. I just wish proud was enough to pay the bills when everything falls apart. I kissed her goodbye and walked toward the bus. Behind me, I heard her car drive away before I'd even reached the station door. For the next 18 hours, riding across 3 states toward a future I couldn't yet imagine, I carried 2 things with me: the weight of my mother's fear and the conviction that I was making the right choice. One of those things would prove stronger than the other. But at 18, climbing onto a Greyhound bus with everything I owned, I had no idea which one it would be. Stanford broke me in ways I didn't know I could be broken. Not academically. I'd been preparing for that challenge my entire life. The computer science coursework was demanding, but manageable. Advanced algorithms, data structures, machine learning fundamentals. These were puzzles to be solved, problems with clear parameters and logical solutions. The real challenge was everything else. I arrived on campus with $300 in my checking account, 2 suitcases, and a naive belief that intelligence would be enough to navigate a world I'd never experienced. My dorm room was in Wilbur Hall, a standard double that cost more per month than my mother made working full-time. My roommate, Jessica, was from Manhattan. Her father was a hedge fund manager. Her everyday purse cost more than my entire wardrobe.
"Oh my God, you're from Arizona," she said on move-in day, like I just announced I was from Mars. "I've never actually met anyone from there. Is it all desert? Do you ride horses to school?" She wasn't being malicious. She was genuinely curious about a life experience so foreign to hers that it might as well have been fictional. But that curiosity became a constant reminder of how different my background was from everyone around me. My first economics class was taught by Professor Williams, a brilliant woman who'd authored 3 textbooks and consulted for the Federal Reserve. During the second week, she used a case study about family wealth management strategies, how to diversify portfolios across generations, minimize estate tax liability, structured trust funds for maximum growth. After class, I approached her desk. "Professor Williams, could you recommend some additional reading on the basics? I'm not familiar with some of the concepts you mentioned." She looked up from her papers, surprised. "Which concepts specifically?" "Well, trust funds, estate taxes, portfolio diversification. My family doesn't really have experience with those areas." Her expression shifted to something between confusion and concern. "Elena, these are fundamental concepts in personal finance. How did you get into Stanford's economics track without understanding basic wealth management principles?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. How do you explain that you got into Stanford because you're brilliant with computers and algorithms, but you've never heard of a trust fund because your family's entire financial strategy has been work hard and hope nothing breaks? "I'm a first-generation college student," I said quietly. "I'm here to learn." Professor Williams softened. "Of course. I'm sorry, I sometimes forget that not everyone comes from the same background. Let me give you some foundational texts to review." But the damage was done. I walked out of that classroom understanding that my intelligence, which had always been my greatest asset, was insufficient preparation for a world where cultural knowledge mattered as much as raw ability. The social dynamics were even more challenging. Study groups that formed organically around shared experiences I'd never had. Casual conversations about spring break trips to Europe, summer internships arranged through family connections, startup ideas funded by parents' investment networks. "Elena, you should totally apply for the Venture Capital Fellowship," suggested Marcus Chen during a late-night coding session in the computer lab. "My dad knows some people at Kleiner Perkins. I could probably get you an introduction." I smiled and nodded, having no idea what Kleiner Perkins was or why an introduction would matter. Later that night, I spent 3 hours researching venture capital, trying to understand an entire ecosystem of funding and networking that everyone else seemed to navigate instinctively. The hardest part wasn't the learning curve. It was the constant feeling of being an imposter. Every conversation revealed another gap in my knowledge, another cultural reference I didn't understand, another assumption about background and resources that didn't apply to me. During my sophomore year, I started a small business building websites for local Palo Alto businesses. Not because I needed the experience, I'd been doing that since high school, but because I needed the money. While my classmates were doing unpaid research assistantships and exclusive internships, I was working 20 hours a week to afford textbooks and meal plans. "Elena, why are you wasting time with freelance work?" asked Dr. Peterson, my academic advisor. "You should be focusing on research projects, building relationships with faculty, positioning yourself for graduate school." How do you explain that graduate school is a luxury you can't consider when you're struggling to afford undergraduate expenses? That research assistantships don't pay enough to live on? That positioning yourself is impossible when you're working every weekend just to stay enrolled? But the worst obstacle wasn't financial. It was emotional. Every month, I called home with updates on my progress, hoping to hear pride in my mother's voice. Instead, I heard worry that deepened with each conversation. "Elena, how are your grades?" "Straight A's, Mom. Dean's List again."
That's good, mija. But are you making friends? Are you taking care of yourself? You sound tired. I'm fine. Just busy with coursework and work. Work? Elena, I thought the scholarship covered everything. I paused, choosing my words carefully. It covers tuition and housing, but there are other expenses. What kind of expenses? Elena, are you getting in over your head?
Every conversation became a careful dance around the truth. I couldn't tell her that Stanford was harder than I'd expected, because that would confirm her fears about me taking on too much. I couldn't tell her that I felt isolated and overwhelmed, because that would prove her point about staying close to home. I couldn't tell her that I was working constantly just to keep up financially, because that would validate her belief that I wasn't prepared for this world. So I lied. Or at least I omitted. I told her about academic successes and downplayed the struggles. I made everything sound easier than it was, more manageable than it felt, more sustainable than it seemed. The isolation was crushing, not just from my family, but from my peers. I was too different from my wealthy classmates to fit in naturally, too proud to admit I needed help, too focused on survival to build the relationships that make college bearable. During my junior year, things got worse. My mother was diagnosed with diabetes, and her medical bills started consuming the small savings account she'd built up over the years. She never asked me for money directly, but I could hear the stress in her voice during our weekly calls. "The insurance covers most of it," she'd say, "but there are copays, and the medications are expensive." I started sending home whatever money I could spare from my freelance work, which meant living on ramen noodles and walking everywhere to save on bus fare. My grades stayed strong, but everything else suffered. I was exhausted, stressed, and increasingly convinced that my mother had been right about the risks of reaching too far. The breaking point came during finals week of my junior year. I was in the library at 3 a.m., running on 4 hours of sleep and too much caffeine, when I got a call from my mother. "Elena, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "What is it, Mom?" "Are you happy? Really happy? Because you sound different, tired, stressed, like you're carrying more than you can handle." I stared at my reflection in the library window, at the dark circles under my eyes, at the pile of textbooks and code printouts that represented my entire life. "I'm fine, Mom." "Elena, you don't sound fine. You haven't sound fine for months. Maybe it's time to consider transferring somewhere closer to home, somewhere less expensive, less stressful." For a moment, sitting in that empty library at Stanford University, surrounded by opportunities I dreamed about my entire life, I almost said yes, almost admitted that she'd been right, that I'd bitten off more than I could chew, that maybe dreams were luxuries that people like us couldn't afford. Instead, I took a deep breath and made a different choice. "Mom, I love you, but I'm not coming home. I'm going to finish what I started." After I hung up, I sat in that library until dawn, surrounded by the evidence of how hard I was working and how much I was struggling, but also surrounded by proof that I was still here, still standing, still fighting. I had no idea that within 2 years, everything would change. But I also had no idea how much harder it would get before it got better. The turning point came from the most unexpected source, a professor who saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Dr. Angela Foster taught advanced cryptography and network security, a notoriously difficult course that separated the serious computer science students from those just coasting through the program. She was brilliant, demanding, and had zero patience for students who expected hand-holding. During my senior year, she assigned a project that seemed impossible: design a payment processing system that could handle real-time transactions while maintaining bank-level security protocols. Most students approached it as a theoretical exercise, creating elaborate presentations about systems that might work in perfect conditions. I built a working prototype. Not because I was trying to show off, but because I'd been handling real-world payment processing problems for 3 years through my freelance work. I knew where the theoretical models broke down in practice, where the security vulnerabilities actually existed, where the performance bottlenecks caused real businesses to lose real money. When presentation day arrived, I was nervous. My classmates had created beautiful slide decks with sophisticated theoretical frameworks. I had a laptop running actual code and a demo that processed live transactions. "Miss Ramirez," Dr. Foster said when my turn came, "show us what you've built." I opened my laptop and pulled up the interface. This is Financial Flow. It's a real-time payment processing platform that handles transactions between businesses and financial institutions. I ran through the demo, showing how the system could process thousands of simultaneous transactions while maintaining end-to-end encryption, how it automatically detected and prevented fraudulent activity, how it integrated seamlessly with existing banking infrastructure. The room was quiet. Too quiet. "Miss Ramirez," Dr. Foster said slowly, "this isn't a classroom exercise. This is a functional payment processing system." "Yes, ma'am. I built it to solve actual problems I'd encountered working with small businesses." "How many transactions can it handle per second?" "In the current configuration, about 15,000, but the architecture is designed to scale horizontally, so that number could increase substantially with additional server capacity." She leaned forward. "Show me the fraud detection algorithm." For the next 20 minutes, she grilled me on every aspect of the system: security protocols, database optimization, network architecture, compliance standards. Questions that would have stumped most graduate students, let alone undergraduates. I answered every one. After class, Dr. Foster asked me to stay behind. "Elena, how long did you spend building that system?" "About 6 months, working evenings and weekends." "And you built it alone?" "Yes, ma'am."
She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Elena, do you understand what you've created? This isn't student work. This is enterprise-level software that could compete with systems built by teams of professional developers." I felt a flush of pride, followed immediately by familiar anxiety. "Dr. Foster, I hope I didn't misunderstand the assignment. I know it was supposed to be theoretical." "Stop," she held up a hand. "You didn't misunderstand anything. You exceeded it by several orders of magnitude. The question is, what are you planning to do with this?" I'm not sure what you mean." "Elena, you've built something that could be worth millions of dollars. Have you considered turning this into an actual business?" The idea had never occurred to me. In my mind, I was just a student from Millbrook, Arizona, who happened to be good at solving computer problems. The concept that I could start a real technology company, compete with established businesses, build something that scaled beyond my local freelance work, it seemed as impossible as flying to the moon. "Dr. Foster, I wouldn't even know where to start. I don't know anything about business formation or funding or any of that. But you know how to build systems that solve real problems. That's the hard part. Everything else can be learned." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "This is David Kim. He's a venture capitalist who specializes in early-stage technology companies. He guest lectures in my graduate seminar. I think you should talk to him." I stared at the card like it might bite me. "Dr. Foster, I'm not ready for something like that. I'm just a student." "Elena, let me ask you something. When you were building this system, did you feel like just a student?" I thought about the late nights in the computer lab, the satisfaction of solving complex problems, the thrill of watching code compile and run perfectly. No, I felt like I was building something important. "Because you were, and you are." She leaned back in her chair.
Elena, I've been teaching at Stanford for 12 years. I've seen thousands of brilliant students. Most of them are very good at following instructions, at solving problems that have already been defined for them. Very few can identify problems that need solving and then build solutions from scratch. But there are so many things I don't know. There are things everyone doesn't know when they start. The question is whether you're willing to learn them. She gestured toward the laptop where my demo was still running. You've already proven you can build. Now the question is whether you're brave enough to scale. That evening, I called David Kim. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number. Mr. Kim, this is Elena Ramirez. Dr. Foster gave me your number. She said you might be interested in seeing a payment processing system I've developed. Elena, yes. Angela told me about your project. She was very impressed, which doesn't happen often. When can you come in for a demo? Whenever works for you, sir. How about tomorrow afternoon? Can you be at our Sand Hill Road office at 2 p.m.? Sand Hill Road? The address that every Stanford computer science student knew by reputation? The heart of Silicon Valley venture capital, where billion-dollar companies were born and dreams either came true or died spectacular deaths. Yes, sir, I'll be there. The next day, I walked into Kim Ventures carrying my laptop and a printout of technical specifications I'd stayed up all night preparing. The office was everything I'd imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, walls lined with framed photos of successful portfolio companies. David Kim was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, wearing jeans and a Stanford sweatshirt. He introduced me to his partner, Sarah Chen, and they settled in to watch my demo. 20 minutes later, they were looking at each other in a way that made my heart race. Elena, we'd like to discuss funding. How much capital do you think you'd need to turn this into a real company? The question hit me like a physical blow. 6 months ago, I'd been sending money home to help with my mother's medical bills. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been considering dropping out because the stress was overwhelming. Now someone was asking how much money I needed to start a business? I honestly don't know. I've never thought about it in those terms. Sarah leaned forward. What if we told you we were prepared to offer you $2 million in seed funding for 20% equity in the company? The room spun. $2 million, 20% equity. This was the language I'd heard my classmates use casually, the world I'd watched from the outside but never imagined joining. You want to invest $2 million in something I built in my dorm room? David smiled. Elena, we don't invest in dorm rooms. We invest in people who can solve problems that millions of other people have, and we think you might be one of those people. That night, I called my mother from my dorm room, staring at a term sheet that could change everything. Mom, something incredible happened today. What is it, Mija? You sound different. Someone wants to invest in the software I've been building. They want to help me turn it into a real company. A long pause. Elena, that sounds wonderful, but investors, isn't that very risky? What if it doesn't work out? For the first time in 4 years, I had an answer to that question that felt confident instead of desperate. Mom, what if it does work out? What if everything we've been afraid of losing is nothing compared to what we might gain?
2 weeks later, I signed the paperwork that turned Financial Flow from a student project into a real company. I had no idea that 5 years later, that company would be worth more than the entire economy of Millbrook, Arizona. But I was about to find out. 5 years later, I was standing in the marble-floored lobby of Forbes headquarters in New York City, watching a team of photographers set up lighting equipment that cost more than most people's cars. The journey from that first $2 million investment to this moment had been a blur of 18-hour days, failed prototypes, breakthrough innovations, and growth that defied every business model textbook ever written. Financial Flow had evolved from a simple payment processor into a comprehensive financial technology platform that powered everything from small business transactions to international banking transfers. We'd raised 4 more rounds of funding, we'd opened offices in 12 countries, we'd processed over $400 billion in transactions, we'd gone from 5 employees working out of a converted garage to 8,400 people across 6 continents. And through it all, I'd continued to downplay the scale of what we were building every time I talked to my mother. "Elena, how's the little computer company doing?" she'd ask during our weekly calls. "It's growing, Mom. We're doing well." "That's good, mija. Are you saving money, building up some security?" "Yes, Mom. I'm being responsible." What I didn't tell her was that doing well meant we'd just been valued at $12 billion, that being responsible meant I personally owned shares worth $2.4 billion, that her daughter, who she'd been worried about for years, had become one of the youngest billionaires in technology. I told myself I was protecting her from information that would just cause anxiety, that she wouldn't understand the numbers anyway, that it was better to let her think I was running a small, stable business rather than the kind of high-growth, high-risk venture that had destroyed my father. But standing in that Forbes lobby, waiting to be photographed for a cover story about my success, I realized I'd been protecting myself as much as her. Protecting myself from the conversation where I'd have to admit that everything she'd warned me against, the risks, the instability, the potential for catastrophic failure, had somehow transformed into unprecedented success. The Forbes article was going to make that conversation unavoidable. "Miss Ramirez?" A young woman with a tablet and a headset approached me. "I'm Jennifer, the photo editor. We're ready to start the shoot whenever you are." The next 3 hours were surreal. They photographed me in a dozen different settings, behind a desk that wasn't mine, in front of a wall of monitors displaying financial data, seated in a leather chair that was supposed to convey authority and success. They asked me to look confident, visionary, like someone who belonged on the cover of the world's most prestigious business magazine. Between shots, the journalist Michael Torres asked questions that cut straight to the heart of the story they were trying to tell. "Elena, you're 23 years old and worth $2.4 billion. How does someone from Millbrook, Arizona, end up building one of the most successful fintech companies in history?" Hard work, good timing, and an incredible team. But there has to be more to it than that. What drove you? What made you willing to take the risks that most people wouldn't? I thought about the real answer. Years of feeling underestimated, a desperate need to prove that my mother's fears were wrong, the conviction that intelligence and determination could overcome any background disadvantage. I said instead, I wanted to solve problems that mattered. Financial technology affects everyone, but most existing solutions were built for institutions, not for the businesses and individuals who needed them most. And your family, how did they feel about your success? The question I'd been dreading. "They're very proud," I lied smoothly. "They've been incredibly supportive throughout the journey." After the photo shoot, I flew back to Seattle and spent 3 days preparing for the phone call I'd been avoiding for 5 years. The call where I'd have to explain to my mother that my daughter's little computer company was actually a global financial technology empire. The Forbes issue hit newsstands on a Tuesday morning. By 8 a.m., my phone was buzzing with congratulations messages from investors, competitors, and tech industry leaders I'd never met. By 10 a.m., the story was trending on social media. By noon, CNN was calling for interviews. At 2 p.m., my mother called. "Elena?" Her voice was very quiet. "Mrs. Patterson from next door just showed me something on her computer. A magazine cover with your picture on it." My heart stopped. "Mom, it says you're worth $2.4 billion. Mom, I can explain. Billion, Elena, with a B. Mrs. Patterson had to explain to me what that number means because I couldn't understand it." I closed my eyes, sitting in my office overlooking Elliott Bay, surrounded by the evidence of everything I'd built and everything I had hidden.
Yes, Mom, it's true. The silence that followed lasted forever. Elena, she said finally. Her voice was very quiet. For 5 years, you've been telling me you run a small business. For 5 years, I've been worrying about whether you're saving enough money for retirement. For 5 years, I've been asking if you're being responsible with your finances. I know. And the whole time you've been, what did the article say? The youngest female billionaire in technology? Mom, I was trying to protect you. From what? From knowing that my daughter is the most successful person in our family's history? From understanding that everything I was worried about was based on complete ignorance of what you'd actually accomplished?
I could hear her crying, and it broke something inside me. Mom, I'm sorry. I thought if you knew the real scale of what I was building, you'd worry more, not less. I thought you'd be afraid of how big it was, how fast it was growing. Elena, do you know what I've been doing for the past 5 years? I've been telling people at church to pray for you because I was worried you weren't stable. I've been clipping job listings from the newspaper because I thought you might need backup options. I've been losing sleep, wondering if my daughter was struggling financially and too proud to ask for help. Each word hit like a physical blow. And now I find out, she continued, voice rising, that while I was worrying about whether you could afford groceries, you were building something worth more money than I could even comprehend. Mom, no, Elena, let me finish. Do you understand what this means? Do you understand that every conversation we've had for 5 years has been based on a lie? Not a lie. I simplified things. You simplified billions of dollars into doing okay. You simplified owning one of the most successful companies in the world into growing steadily. Elena, that's not simplification. That's deception. I sat in my billion-dollar office looking out at a view that cost more per month than most people made in a year and realized that all my success meant nothing if the most important person in my life felt betrayed by it. Mom, what do you want me to say? That I was wrong for hiding this from you? Fine, I was wrong. But I was trying to protect both of us from a conversation I didn't know how to have. The conversation where you tell your mother that your daughter succeeded beyond her wildest dreams, that conversation seemed too difficult. The conversation where I admit that everything you warned me against, the risks, the instability, the potential for failure, turned out to be the exact path to more success than anyone in Millbrook has ever imagined? Yes, Mom, that conversation seemed impossible. Another long silence. Elena, she said finally, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay? Are you happy? Really? Truly happy? Or have you just been so focused on proving me wrong that you forgot to ask yourself if this is the life you actually wanted? The question hit me like a lightning bolt. In 5 years of building, scaling, and growing, I'd never stopped to ask myself that simple question. Was I happy? Or had I just been running from my mother's fears for so long that I'd forgotten what I was running toward? I don't know, I said quietly. But I think I'm about to find out. 3 weeks after that phone call, I was standing in the baggage claim at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, holding a single overnight bag and feeling more nervous than I had during any billion-dollar board meeting. My mother's question had haunted me every day since the Forbes story broke. Was I happy? The honest answer was that I'd been so busy building something extraordinary that I'd forgotten to notice whether it was building me into someone I actually wanted to be. For 20 years, my relationship with my mother had been defined by her fear and my rebellion against it. She was afraid I'd fail, so I succeeded. She was afraid I'd take risks, so I took bigger ones. She was afraid I'd end up broken like my father, so I built something unbreakable. But somewhere in that dynamic, we'd lost each other. The drive to Millbrook gave me an hour to think about what I was going to say. The town looked exactly the same Main Street, the same local businesses, the same sense that time moved differently here than in the rest of the world. But driving through it as a billionaire
felt like visiting a previous life. My mother was waiting on the front porch when I pulled into the driveway. She looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow, and I realized with a shock that I couldn't recall the last time I had actually looked at her instead of just talking to her through a phone. "Elena, you came." "Of course I came, Mom." We stood there for a moment, two women who'd spent 5 years talking past each other, trying to figure out how to start over. "Come inside," she said finally. "I made your favorite, chicken and rice, though I suppose you can afford much fancier food now." I followed her into the kitchen, the same room where I'd eaten breakfast before taking the Greyhound to Stanford 14 years earlier, the same table where she'd tried to convince me to stay local, to choose safety over possibility. "Mom, before we eat, I need to say something." She turned from the stove, wooden spoon in her hand, waiting. "I'm sorry. Not for succeeding, I won't apologize for that, but for lying to you about it, for making you worry when there was nothing to worry about, for letting you think I was struggling when I was thriving." She set down the spoon and leaned against the counter. "Elena, I've been thinking about this for 3 weeks, about why you felt like you had to hide your success from me. And I realized that maybe I taught you to hide it. Maybe I made you feel like success was something to be ashamed of, something dangerous, something that would inevitably lead to failure." I felt tears starting, which surprised me. I'd cried more in the past month than I had in the previous 5 years. "Mom, you were trying to protect me. I understand that now. After Dad's business failed, after everything we went through."
Elena, stop. She held up her hand. Your father's business failed because he overextended himself, because he took risks without understanding them, because he confused optimism with planning. What you built is completely different. How do you know? You said yourself you don't understand the technology industry. She smiled, and for the first time in years, it was a smile without worry behind it. Because I've spent the past 3 weeks learning about it. I've read every article about your company. I've watched interviews with your employees. I've researched financial technology and market valuations and all the things I should have understood years ago. I stared at her. You researched fintech? Elena, my daughter built a $12 billion company. The least I could do was figure out what that actually means. She moved to the table, gestured for me to sit. Do you know what I learned? What? That you didn't just get lucky. That you didn't just take wild risks and hope for the best. That you built something that solves real problems for real people. Something that creates value rather than just moving it around. Something that's actually making the world better. I sat down across from her, the same seat I'd occupied for thousands of family dinners, but everything felt different. I also learned, she continued, that you employ 8,400 people, that you've created jobs in 12 countries, that small businesses can access financial services because of what you built, that they never could before. Mom, I'm not finished. I learned that when other tech companies were laying people off during the pandemic, you hired more employees, that you've donated millions to educational programs for kids from backgrounds like ours, that you're not just successful, you're responsible with that success. I was crying now. Really crying, because I'd spent so many years wanting to hear exactly these words. Elena, I was wrong. Not about everything. There are still risks in what you do. There's still uncertainty. But I was wrong to think that meant you couldn't handle them. I was wrong to think that our family's limitations had to become your limitations. She reached across the table and took my hands. Your father wasn't a failure because he dreamed big. He was a failure because he couldn't adapt when his dreams met reality. You've proven that you can do both, dream impossibly big and build something that actually works.
We sat there for a long time, holding hands across the kitchen table, bridging 20 years of misunderstanding. "So," she said finally, "are you happy?" The question that had been haunting me for 3 weeks. I thought about my life, the penthouse apartment, the private jet, the board meetings and investment rounds, and constant pressure to grow bigger, faster, more efficiently. "I think I'm successful," I said slowly. "I think I'm proud of what I've built, but happy? I'm not sure I've taken time to figure out what that would even look like." "Then maybe that's what you work on next." 2 days later, I flew back to Seattle with a different perspective on everything I'd built. Success, I realized, isn't just about proving other people wrong. It's about proving yourself right, about the choices you make, the life you create, the person you become in the process. My mother and I still talk every week, but now our conversations are about the things that matter: how I'm treating my employees, whether I'm taking care of my health, what I'm doing with the resources I've been given, how I'm using my platform to create opportunities for other people from backgrounds like ours. She still worries about me because that's what mothers do, but now she worries about the right things. And me? I'm still building, still growing the company, still solving problems that matter, but I'm also learning to ask myself the questions that matter even more. Am I becoming someone I'm proud to be? Am I using my success to create more success for others? Am I building a life, not just a business? The Forbes cover is framed in my office now, not because I'm proud of the recognition, but because it reminds me of the conversation that changed everything. The conversation where my mother and I finally understood that we'd been on the same side all along. We both wanted me to succeed. We just had different definitions of what success looked like. Now I know. Success isn't just about the money you make, or the companies you build, or the recognition you receive. Success is about becoming someone you're proud to be, someone your family is proud to know, someone who uses their gifts to make the world a little bit better. So let me ask you the same question my mother asked me. Are you happy? Are you building something that matters? And if not, what are you waiting for? The world needs people who can dream big and build responsibly, people who can take risks and create stability, people who understand that success isn't about proving others wrong, it's about proving yourself right. Your background doesn't determine your future. Your family's limitations don't have to become your limitations. And sometimes the very people who doubt you are just loving you the only way they know how. What's your billion-dollar idea? What's the dream you've been hiding from the people who love you most? Stop hiding. Start building. The world is waiting.